Welcome, Jeremy. This is the Retrospective.
Hey, Peter. Okay, this is season 2, episode 2, really the beginning of season 2. This is our new improved format. We're going to really try for 20, 30 minutes, really actionable, diving in on a single topic, and we'll see where we go from there.
Welcome, every listener. And let's jump right into it. What is today's topic?
Well, probably not the most favorite topic for most managers, but quiet quitting. I think it's quite a topical one. I think there's a lot of organizations experiencing that, and we wanted to dive right in and tackle it.
Indeed. What would you say for someone who is not familiar with the term quiet quitting? What are the signs that when you see in someone on your team, you would categorize it as more or less quiet quitting?
Yeah, so quiet quitting is really where someone essentially gives up in work and they're doing the bare minimum to get by. And I think that you can really see it in a few signs that basically fairly obvious, but a reduction in their productivity.
Mhm.
They're just producing less. The quality of their work is dropping, and we can dive into it more, but their engagement level is dialed back significantly in the team.
Yeah.
Actually, in planning this, I think we describe this, it's all proactivity of the person disappears completely.
Exactly.
And I think that's like the core of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's other signs of engagement where you have things like negativity that starts to creep into every conversation. In some cases, it could be participating in a lot of gossip around the coffee machine or in the bar. And the last one, which is really a lot of unexplained absences, people just not there during the day, whether that's through things they say, I'm away, or you start to really see that they're not there. But
Yeah.
and all of those separately might point to other things. But really, when you start to see all of that happening together, I think that's where you really can say that this person, maybe they're in this category of quiet quitting.
I think that covers it pretty well. Another thing we talked about when preparing is to simplify quiet quitting is a loss of motivation in a very short way. Yeah, and that can manifest in all those. It's interesting you said that all of these should be there to a point to have it. I saw it in the sense when actually the output of the person didn't degrade that much, but their engagement and their motivation and the proactivity. And there were topics that were important for this person that they were arguing on meetings to do it their way. And it was just like a drop. And they were like, yeah, whatever, just tell me what to do and I will do it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to diagnose also when you see some of these things. There's no like hard and fast in this, and we're going to come on to that and how to tackle it, how to diagnose it and so on. But there are some kind of scenarios, I would say there are some patterns and company situations that in particular cause this to happen. In my own case, I've seen this multiple times when you have a significant change in senior leadership in an organization.
Yes.
Which radically changes the culture of the organization. And people who were highly engaged become extremely disengaged. And I think like partly what we're seeing also in the market today is there's less jobs. So in some cases in tech where we've had great jobs and great salaries, many of those scenarios, people would just leave the company. You have a lot of quitting. But for whatever reason, there might be factors now in the climate where that's less the case. Another scenario I've seen is when I worked at TravelDo, we had a significant period of uncertainty about the future of the company. And we could really see that there was something going on, but we didn't know. And then it was finally announced to the staff that there was a decision around actually ending the company. And then the decision to end the company was reversed at the last minute. And then put back on the table months later. And you can imagine all the uncertainty and everything else. And then finally, obviously, the company was shut down. And in that shutdown period from when it was announced, it was still business as usual until like a phased shutdown of the entire business. So you can obviously see that quiet quitting is something almost natural in that.
In this situation, that's a very good example. One I have in my experience is when at Gawker, I was site lead for the Hungarian office. And when the company was going through a bankruptcy process and looking for new investors and acquisition, that's also a typical case when people are just giving up and quiet quitting. But it can also be the impact of the secondary impact of a layoff, for example, shutting down a product wing, making some unpopular product decisions that can result in these sort of decisions in the buy versus build, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually what we're describing is scenarios that are often outside of the control of a manager, but that have a wide impact in the organization.
Yeah.
I've seen that also in startups. Startups are quite volatile. They don't all succeed. And in one case, we had to lay off more than 30% of the company. That was really brutal for people leaving. It was brutal for people who were staying, and that we lost basically all the executive leadership in that same phase to secure the future of that company. But at the same time, the collateral damage of that is where you have a number of people who just silently go and check out and do the bare minimum.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the signs, there is actually one more thing I would like to mention, that when you see quiet quitting in your team, it might not be about the company. Maybe there are some personal reasons. Maybe something is going on in the life of the person. So be very aware of your own internal assumptions and biases, and don't assume that what you're seeing is quiet quitting. Maybe there's another reason.
Yeah, we're going to get to that about how to diagnose it with the person and so on. But you talked about earlier, and you said quiet quitting is really a lack of motivation.
Yeah, to oversimplify it. Yeah.
And I think it's useful to introduce a concept that we talk about all the time. Well, do you want to talk about Dan Pink?
Sure. Just very shortly, I recommend everyone, and maybe we can put in the show notes, this is a great explanatory video. Daniel Pink, he writes about what motivates us in his book Drive. And contrary to what people would think, in most jobs, especially creative jobs that use the brain and not physical force, the three things that motivate people are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Personally, I use this framework often when diagnosing quiet quitting and loss of motivation, but also when, and we will talk about it later, how to impact the motivation and bring back the person.
Yeah, and we can really see in the scenarios we described that the symptoms of quiet quitting and the scenarios of these companies, the purpose of the company can be changed radically overnight.
Yes.
Then there's the outside things, and that when you burst the bubble, the bubble of a purpose of why maybe you're at the company or what it does, or the impact you have, like in one I talked about where business is going to be shut down. When you start to lose purpose, that's where your motivation can really hit your limits.
But similarly, there are cases in maybe in some of our examples is when a team or a person loses their autonomy because there is a micromanaging leadership, or decisions are made not necessarily based on technical input, but from outside circumstances, financial, whatever, and they feel like they don't have the autonomy anymore or not level that.
Exactly. You talked about a radical product decision that overruling,
for example,
a lot of people. So as a manager, you only have, there's only so much of this that you can really control. And we're going to talk about what you can control and how you can address it. One of the other things that we wanted to say here was that obviously in the remote context,
very important. Yeah.
This is even harder sometimes to diagnose, because when we were prepping for this, you said, suddenly you might have someone who just switches off all the camera in team calls.
Yeah.
And it's harder to detect that kind of checking out.
The absenteeism is much less obvious in a distributed setting.
Yeah.
But this can pop up in an office setting also. Like the person starts to arrive later to work, take longer lunch breaks.
Yeah. Not someone I worked with, but someone that was a friend of mine. There were much more boozy lunches between him and his colleagues.
Wow. That was in France, right?
No, in the UK.
Yeah. Interesting.
In the UK.
Okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit about cultural differences and some of the other nuances to this, Peter?
That's an important aspect that we identified. That oftentimes what contributes to quiet quitting is that person, in an ideal scenario or in a vacuum, they would quit their job because they lost their motivation, they don't get the learnings or whatever reasons. But there is something almost external reasons that keep them at the company. And this is where, for example, in European countries like France, where there is a very good labor help for employees, financially it makes sense for them to stay longer and wait till they get fired because they get better help from the state. Or if they have, especially US startups, they have stock options that they need to wait a certain time before they can exercise them. And then, so all these, I don't know, golden handlocks that make you stay. Similarly, or in the US, for example, if you have dependence on a healthcare plan that the company is providing, all these stuff are creating a very dangerous situation because internally the person would move away, but these external circumstances, financial considerations, they make them stay at the company, and this can make someone really bitter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I saw that very hard for people to be motivated in travel do when you know the company could end. And at the same time, you know that with the state protection that you have,
Yeah.
there could be quite a good payout.
Yeah. But also
significant.
I see it with a US mother company that if there are people on an L1 visa, for example, they
Exactly.
are tied to the company, they leave the company, need to leave the country. That's a very difficult situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've seen that actually even in here in France
Yeah.
as well. I think the other thing we are now in a climate, we mentioned this earlier, where there are less jobs. And we're seeing a wave of change in companies where your company may have changed significantly in terms of its culture, deep focus on execution numbers, and that's the only thing that matters above all else, layoffs and all sorts of other things. And then at the same time, you look outside and you see the same thing everywhere else.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, I'm not going to give as much here because I'm less engaged. But then again, there's not that many jobs and it's going to be the same anyway. So why change?
Yeah. Or I'm just afraid that I'm not going to find something that's going to be as good as what I have now, even if it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Peter, what are the consequences?
Yeah. Let's move on to the next step. Why is it bad that somebody's just bringing the expected moment? What are the negative consequences of quiet quitting? So when we were preparing, we selected different groups, starting from the individual. You can see that this kind of mindset results in less productivity, less work done, lower quality of the work being done, really just checking the minimum. But the real danger, what I found, is beyond the individual, because this kind of behavior is really viral. It infects others, and it can have a very concrete negative impact on the team morale, team productivity, communication. I would even say, the morale is probably the worst and most significant part.
Yeah, especially when we talk about the negative behavior that they also bring with that.
Exactly.
The sniping, the comments, maybe the gossip, the
cynicism,
the checked out, the undermining, and it feeds. It's like a vortex.
And it's a nice connection to the other impact of quiet quitting on someone on your team is on you, on the engineering manager, because a part of an engineering manager's job is to be positive. Don't mean the US fake positivism, but just, motivate the team, be positive, show the good side of everything, rally folks around you and lead. And it's really hard if someone, especially if they are key players like a staff engineer or someone, is dragging you down. It takes a lot of mental energy away from day to day.
And the worst is you don't spend that time and energy on anyone else in the team.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like a compounding problem that you also that you have, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you have an, I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but you've had an experience where in this scenario, you then end up taking an action that you may not like fully feel happy about in the future because
that's
you
a
just
good
want
point.
to
I guess I can talk about it without names. So there was a case in my experience where the negativity of the person and the cynicism and how they were spreading it, just basically, I had a very emotional response to that. And in a few weeks, I worked on firing the person without giving them better support and understanding really what's going on and helping them overcome this phase. Maybe it would have resulted also in a termination, but at least I would have given all the chances to the person. So
yeah,
that was a good learning for me.
Yeah, we all live and learn from
Yeah,
losing.
exactly.
We've got the scars.
But to connect back to the point, the impact is very real on the engineering manager, and it's sometimes very hard to detect that you get emotional. And when you need all your energy in the morning to get up, it's impacting you also. And you want to be positive, and then there comes this guy again with this cynic, negative remarks, and you just react emotionally.
Yeah. And I think like this quiet quitting behavior is really amplified in geeks because geeks
Yeah,
are already cynical and negative in a way,
stereotypically, yeah,
stereotypically, but you
yeah.
really see that and they're
Point,
very
yeah,
abrupt and direct and whatever. And then you have that. So it's really,
definitely, yeah.
and it's not just the team and the manager, it's the org.
And that's the widest impact of quiet quitting is there is, if the person is responsible for communication with other departments and functions, and arguably everyone is responsible
Mhm.
for that to some extent, those discussions, those communications are going to degrade a lot if this person is a lot of engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really the blast radius is well beyond the
Yeah,
team, you know?
yeah, yeah. It can even get to customers if it's a
Mhm.
customer facing role. Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. We talked about this, but like, how do we deal with this, Peter? What can we do as a manager?
that's the $1 million question, right? Like, that's why people are still listening to us. And then we get to the point. I think if before getting to that, the last thing is I think you need to realize that you need to take action. Like it's the problem is not going to solve itself just by ignoring those cynical remarks or getting a little easy on the person, not paying attention that their code is taking a long time or
Mhm.
degrading or etc. It's just going to increase the problem. So I think it's important that you need to pay attention to it and you need to take actions. It's also, and let's start to get into the
The
elephant in
steps.
the room
Yeah.
or the step. One more thing I wanted to take that can connect here is that don't over index. Don't let this occupy all your thoughts because as you
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, there's a big risk of losing attention for the good performers, for the high performers, those who are pulling even more of their weight
Mhm.
because of someone who's quiet quitting. So focus on the person, but don't
Yeah.
let all your
Yeah. I think quiet quitting is really like a cancer and needs to be taken out of the
yeah,
body, you know.
like that. Well, it's a bit
It,
brutal, but
but I don't mean it in the sense that doesn't mean that we
not the
fired
person, but
the behavior and it might be, either that behavior has to change or the person has to leave.
yeah,
And,
that's how I
you
sum
know,
it also. Yeah. And let's get into
yeah.
these two options maybe. Like when we say the behavior needs to change, it's nothing magic. We just really need to keep this expected level of performance enforced, even in hard times.
Mhm.
And it's not easy because
Mhm.
if a company is going through a turbulent time, half the team was laid off, and you think your staff engineer
Mhm.
is irreplaceable and you really need it by at all costs. But if the person is quiet quitting at the same time, you really need to have an honest conversation with them and still hold them up to the same standards. Because first, this is how they can perform. This is
Mhm.
what we expect. But then your actions are showing what you can get away with the
Mhm.
company. If people in the team see that I don't know, Joe can get by with less work just because he's a staff engineer, then they're at risk at quiet
Mhm.
quitting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this performance culture is super important.
Yeah.
Knowing what good looks like,
Yeah.
everyone understanding that and providing strong feedback,
Yeah.
having a plan and all the rest for
Yeah.
people.
Let's go through this in detail.
Yeah.
So to be very concrete, I advise just really it sounds trivial, but talking to the person.
Mhm.
It's good to understand their side of the story. There is this SBI framework, the Situation Behavior Impact framework, where that's a very good,
Mhm.
very objective, very distanced way of giving feedback on some of their. This is how I would start a discussion like this, collecting a few examples, explaining what was their behavior as opposed to what I would expect from them, and the impact their negative behavior had on the team or project or something.
Mhm.
It's really hard to debate that. And then I would let them a chance to. This is the thing I were talking about earlier that maybe it's not quite fitting. Maybe there is something in their lives. Maybe there is some
Mhm.
personal reason for this. Hopefully you as a manager have a very good relationship with the person, a very trust-based, transparent
Mhm.
relationship where they can open up and explain what's going on. And then I don't want to talk about that now because we're going to go way over time, but that requires different.
Yeah.
But if it's quiet quitting, give the feedback, get some commitment from the person, make it clear the expectations that you're not going to make
Mhm.
exceptions just because the company is going through some hard periods because of the team and everything. And then get some commitment from them about changing. You can be blunt. You can explain that this can either lead to some
Mm,
change in their behavior, or this will lead to them having to leave the team or company.
yeah.
Because it's not.
Yeah. I think that step about talk to them, give them feedback. And this is really crucial, that secure their commitment
Yes, they
to
need to have a
change.
buy. Yeah,
If you can't make a plan together after that without securing that commitment, it's just you forcing someone to do it.
exactly. Like they
Yeah.
should. This is important, and this is almost like running a peak performance improvement program. They need to own their own performance and career. They shouldn't see it like
Mm,
this is a requirement from my manager. These are the lists. That's what they need
yeah.
autonomy.
And we said it already, but the number one thing in all of this is don't over-index on one person.
Yeah,
If one person is showing signs of that, I'm sure that everyone's affected. And especially if someone is in that mode of quiet quitting, negativity, and the spiral, you need to spend time with the rest of the team as well. In fact, double down and maybe try and extend your one-to-ones with everyone in the team.
yeah,
I know that's really tough. I know that as a manager right now, you're being told you need to be more hands-on, more in the detail and everything else. And you might over-index your one-to-ones onto execution topics, but you need to spend time on just the human level. Your one-to-one is for those human things.
Yeah.
And I know that it's like a tough moment for managers everywhere, but it's really crucial to not keep your eye on everyone.
Yeah.
In all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is how you can have a bigger impact than yourself, not by taking over some
Mm.
of the coding task from your staff engineer who's quiet quitting.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about then. Okay, so we're in making a plan with
Mhm.
someone, right? So they say,
Yeah.
I'm okay, I see it.
Yeah.
What are the levers that managers? Let's talk about the levers that managers have, even in some of the hardest situations,
Yeah.
to actually make a difference in the team for the person and for
I mean, we talked a lot about the one-on-ones and the discussions and etc. I think another important aspect is the distribution of work in the team. You can help the person by finding work that's a bit more motivating for them, that can help them get out of this.
Mhm.
You shouldn't make exceptions. They
Mhm.
shouldn't feel like they are being rewarded for their bad behavior by getting the juicy, interesting
Mhm.
and works. But with some shaping of distribution of work, this can be useful. The reason of this, and then this is when I want to bring back again the Daniel Pink, the three great motivation,
Mhm.
autonomy, mastery, purpose, is you see a loss in one of the aspects, usually the purpose, and you can gain back some from another one. And in this case, it would be the mastery,
Mhm.
for example. If you can find an interesting
Mhm.
technological challenge for the person, that might trigger something
Mhm.
that brings back their motivation. And because it's impacting the mastery.
Yeah, for me, this is like the lever that's really in the wheelhouse of the manager. When you control the distribution of the work, I think you can really make a difference. Both, I think people need to feel progress in their work.
Yeah.
If they're spinning their wheels, if nothing's happening, and you're really responsible for making sure that individuals and the team collectively is feeling progress. So work is getting done, and you can like manage that, and you also manage the impact of that and translate. Sometimes that progress is becoming replacement for the purpose that's maybe missing in the organization wider and so
Oh,
on.
yeah. Yeah. You just find it somewhere else. Another way you can find it is if, for example, you are working in a B2C startups, like we have hundreds of thousands of users. Your work is impacting their lives. That's a great purpose
Yeah,
motivator if you can make it to the person.
exactly. And clearly the other part of progress is still career progress.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the other sort of side where, I remember when we're sitting with the team in Traveldo and we're looking at the end of the company here. And I said, folks, like we still have, like you said, we have customers. People are still booking travel and doing their expenses with us, but we're also on this really exciting mission of going. We were doing a transformation of legacy to a modern architecture, and we were going from 10 deploys a year to trying to get to on demand, and we were doing 5 deploys every day. And we were on that journey. We did, and what's really interesting is even after I left, the team continued to progress
Mhm.
on that journey,
Knowing that the company is
knowing
going to end.
knowing the company's going to end because of the learning and the growth for them.
Yeah.
And the folks who embrace that challenge, they've gone on to great things in the next step in their
Yeah.
career. So I think as a manager, you can really create the ingredients for that. I think, and that progress is
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah. I think just one more last thing that you can use and you should use is about emphasizing all the good things that are still there that makes this place a good company and a good team. There are a lot of stuff that we take for granted
Exactly.
and don't say it out enough. And that's one thing that you need to choose the time well, because what I find useful is letting people just freely vent on one-on-ones. This is not the time when I say, okay, but wait, we still get, I don't know, a great team and a good tech stack and everything. No, on these cases, I think it's important to just let them vent so they have a steam release and that they can behave better in team aspects. But like in a team setting, in a retrospective, in a planning meeting, whatever, you can emphasize this stuff, like health of the code bit, the CI system, just the team itself. It usually can be good.
Yeah. The key thing when you're allowing people to vent and everything else is not to get sucked in yourself.
That's very important. Yeah, maybe we can talk a bit like how to handle these one-on-one conversations really well. It's almost like a psychologist, like you want to make the person understand that their feelings are their feelings and every feeling is valid, but you don't want to validate what they are saying themselves. Like you don't want to say, oh yeah, this really sucks, but you can say, I can see you're really frustrated about this, or I can feel that it impacts your morale
Empathy.
strongly. Empathy, exactly. That's what you're looking for without validation.
Yeah.
Because if you start to validate, there is a risk of getting into this negativity spiral. And I see it in a lot of managers, especially entry-level ones, that they think that they need to be in a good friendship and in a very good personal relationship with their teams. And they over-index in a way that they validate all the negativity and they start to build this us versus them culture where, okay, this sucks, but we are against leadership and we still care for the users and show what, I don't know, things that they really need. And it's just toxic. It's not leading anywhere.
That's where you lose yourself as a manager and you put yourself in danger of actually being in a low performance.
True.
Because your job is still to, as a manager, you represent the company at that level and you're responsible for delivering a result within that team that's aligned with what the business needs. So you really need to,
it's a careful balance.
It's a careful balance. So it's a really tricky situation and we'll talk more, maybe the self-care, we're going to talk more about that, but that's a critical part of this.
Yeah.
I'll just say, I think that we talked about empowering staff in all of this to help them feel progress. I think the other critical part and lever that you have, and it's a responsibility, is to remove blockers.
Yes, good point.
It's a critical part of a manager's job is to, when there are blockers there, is to remove them. And some of them might just be psychological, and you can find other ways around things that may not work. But some of them will require you to take a responsibility beyond the team and so on. And it is removing obstacles for your team members is super important as much as you can within whatever environment you're operating. And I recognize that for some managers hearing this, when they look at the blockers the team are facing, they may not be able to influence those. So then you just have to find other ways to work around them.
Yeah, I think it touches on another important aspect of the role of a manager is to provide clarity, provide clear information on what you can control, what you cannot control, what we already know and what we explicitly just don't know, and we will see. Because there are a lot of guessings and rumors and fears and everything going around in the team. So you as a manager, you can help a lot tangibly by creating a more clear environment.
Yeah. And actually the one-to-ones is a critical part of that, where in all this venting and whatever, not every time is venting, but one-to-one is a fantastic opportunity to provide context and perspective to people in the one-to-one context. You obviously have the team meeting as well and the get-togethers, but your job is to try and provide a bridge to what's going on around. And I think the other super critical part of this is providing praise and encouragement for the person as you work on that plan with them. Praising, that's probably a whole other topic, but it is people, for every one negative, it's like one negative thing or negative feedback, they need 5 positives. So you almost need to be looking for something positive in each person every day. Now, obviously but that's the kind of mindset that you need to be in. What can I say to Joe and Jane today in my team about what they're doing? How can I create this positive environment? And the positive environment in the team is what will get you kind of like going. And you can, it's a bubble, and you can, as a line manager, the one thing is you're far from, of course, there's big things happening in the company, but at the same time, you can really control that environment much more than you think
Yeah.
into a positive little
Yeah.
mini bubble.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like, maybe we'll have a separate episode about feedback, but the whole strengths-based feedback framework, that where you really, by praising the behavior you want to see, you're enforcing it and encouraging it, and it's easier to follow. So, and shows what good looks like for the rest of the team was.
Yeah. So get in touch with us if you're facing this scenario. If you have other thoughts, would really like to hear more from folks on this. And also, if you try some of these and if it works, nothing encourages us more than hearing that we're able to help people. And these are very difficult situations to deal with.
Yeah, maybe that's to close it. That's also an important aspect, that you need to realize you cannot save everyone. Don't make it your life goal that you should bring back everyone back to an engaged self. Oftentimes, it's better for the company and the person also if they're part, so they can find a job that's better suiting their needs.
Yeah, exactly. So to summarize, you have to address it. It's your job. Don't be afraid. And we know that those conversations are hard. Both of us have some kind of office hours or ways to contact us if you want some encouragement. You have more control than you think in terms of the bubble that you can create and what you can do. Pay attention to the whole team. Don't forget the rest of the team. Create a positive environment.
And then, don't forget to look after yourself. This is really hard. It can impact your mental health. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Maybe we can talk about in a different episode about what are the forms of how you can rely on the peer network within and outside of the company, your manager, etc. So, this is hard, but you can have a really tangible, positive impact on people's life if you pay attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Well, brilliant, Peter. And as usual, when you're hearing our podcast, feed the algorithms.
Like and subscribe.
You can tell we really are cynical about the whole algorithm thing.
Well, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but to look at it in a more positive way, liking and subscribing, or what I really like is actually, let's talk a bit about this, just a sentence. I heard it in one of the podcasts at the end that the best way to get creative work out there is by word of mouth. So if you found this useful, send it to someone who you think it can be useful. Send it to your team in the company, a friend, someone. That's the biggest help you can do to spread this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, take care of yourselves and have a great day.